no-cost lease for 4 years with the assumption that we would, actually with a mandate, for using it for outreach, conservation outreach work to supplement the work that land conservation does. And because the Watershed Protection Committee is all about promotion of regenerative practices, which are going to improve not only water quality, but also soil health, leading to resiliency, like Paul was just talking about, it seemed to be a natural fit. So we've got this partnership, and they're allowing us to use that. And in effect, they're giving us a really valuable resource we can use as a match to attract other funding to conduct our work. So it was far forward thinking on the part of Racine County to set this up. And I've been investigating. I don't see anything like this in the state of Wisconsin. So it's really telling about the forethought that the county of Racine has. So they are definitely a major partner. We're also partnering with Racine County Department, so land conservation has been instrumental in not only seeing this opportunity and greasing the skids in county government to get it going, but also helping us move forward, and that includes technical support, not only for AV here today, but also the resources they can provide with GIS systems and documenting what we're doing with drone photography and that kind of thing. I'd also like to acknowledge the Parks Department. Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge our funding. So we have finally gotten this long-term funding from the Wisconsin NRCS. So this is a 3-year grant through the Conservation Innovation Grant Program, which pays for the majority of our funding. And when I say funding, this is external funding. So we, as a group, are contributing 50% of the funding to this project in the form of our volunteer time, inputs, and our equipment. So that's a huge contribution. I don't want to diminish it, but it's like to thank the external funding. So right now it's NRCS funding. The work to get here, the baseline funding, that was paid for by Nature Conservancy, primarily by Nature Conservancy. We have a representative here in the back. Ricardo, you want to stand up, please? Nature Conservancy is also supporting this work in the form of an internship program. So we had a part-time intern last year, and we're in the works of getting intern time again to assist us with the project this year. We've had donations, smaller donations from several individuals as well as corporate interests, input suppliers, and that kind of thing. Now I'd really like to acknowledge the work of the group. So it's me as spokesman up here, professional and agricultural scientist, but this is a huge effort that takes a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are listed up there who have contributed time and their equipment as well as inputs. You know, our group's kind of shrunk. Why don't you just stand up? You can see your name up there. Please stand up. Brian, certainly stand up. AJ, Chuck, John, fellas in the back, Julian, Sean, you listen, Anthony. So these are the guys that actually get it done. I'm just kind of the Poindexter that collects the data. We also see a character up there listed as anonymous. Everyone that's a member of our group has at one point or another picked rocks at Casey Eagle Park. That's because we inherited a rock pile, 20 years of conventional tillage, and so the soil type has a lot of rocks, and there's some other groups too that I wasn't part of this, but a lot of people have contributed in just cleaning up the site and making it into the site where we can do the research that we're doing today. We've had a lot of support both from relations to our group, and again, I mentioned John. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge our advisors. So Dr. Jamie Patton has been involved with this project from the beginning, helping me design a project where we could look at the changes in soil health. And so I'm really grateful to her for laying the groundwork. And then also with our NRCS funding, Andy Belushi, who is the state assistant soil scientist, and he comes to us with a soil health background. So he's helped us tweak our sampling scheme so we can more accurately measure changes in soil health with time. All right, so watershed protection groups. What are we about? We're about promoting promoting about promoting practices amongst farm groups. And so the idea is, with our funding sources, we're going to have clean water. But let's face it, all our farmers that are in the room here, we're all about soil health, at least the regenerative farmers. Soil health drives it all. Soil health is kind of behind our project here. But really, let's look at our bigger function of the group. So we're promoting regenerative practices. The data tells us, for us to be successful, we need to reach out to new audiences. We need to get people that aren't practicing no-till and cover crops if we're going to make substantial progress in conservation in the state of Wisconsin. The data I'm showing up here bears this out. So this data is kind of old. It's dated. It's from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. And what it does is show the change in the cornerstone practices of regenerative agriculture, no-till and cover cropping, the change from 2012 to 2017. There's some good news in this data. So we're seeing an increase in both no-till and cover crops, 25 and 10% respectively. We still have a ways to go. In 2017, we're only at 20% of our acreage in the state of Wisconsin is under no-till. And cover crops are a dismal 6%. So there's a lot of room for improvement. The discouraging amount or information from this data is that it's the same people doing it. If we look at the growth in the number of farms, there's a few percentage increase in no-till, but a stunning decrease in cover crops. And this bears out what the research literature and survey data says about cover crop use. If somebody has a bad experience with cover crops, they're going to quit. Regardless of how much cost your money you're throwing at them, they're going to quit. And that's a problem, and that's something we need to overcome. That's why I work on it professionally. And I'd also like to say, personally, on my farm, I've had numerous failures since the mid-90s. So I guess that says I'm a slow learner, or I'm really committed to soil quality. I thought for sure you'd laugh at that, so that's the joke. We have a long ways to go. We need to reach new audiences. All right, so that's where our project at the park comes in. So our situation, we know that we need to increase adoption. The literature that's out there, survey data says that there's reasons why people don't do it. Cover cropping and no-till. And mostly they're financial in nature. So we do have the problem of history, tradition. We've always done it this way. We're going to keep doing it this way because it works. The others are financial. The first is there's a fear that there's going to be a yield reduction which directly reduces income. That makes sense. The second is the perception that there's going to be a transition period. You start with the conservation practices, you're going to see a reduction in yield, a reduction in income, and can you weather that? Can you afford to do it economically or not? So that's barrier number 3. Barrier number 4 is the lease. 50% of the cropland in the state of Wisconsin is under lease. Most of those leases are 3-year leases. So if we have a perception that return to a conservation practice takes more than 1 year, and you're in a limited term on that lease, you're likely not going to do it. So those are the barriers that we're facing. Information that we collected from last year's attendees here at this workshop bear this out. Here's some direct quotes from our evaluation. This is after listening to Gabe Brown talk about regenerative agriculture for several hours. Regenerative agriculture is great in theory, but how do we actually implement these practices and make money? That gets at the overall picture of profitability. Number 2, how do we implement these practices without losing money initially? This gets at the problem of transition to a regenerative system. And then the third hits the nail on the head as far as the lease. What about lease ground? Can we make the transition in 3 years? So, in thinking about setting up a project, we thought if we're going to get more adoption, we have to prove financially that it's a go. So that's the driver behind our project at KCO Park. Next, please. So our objectives is to compare regenerative, using our best practices, the way we do it on our farm, to conventional agriculture, how it's practiced here in southeast Wisconsin, not only for soil health, let's address the elephant in the room, economics. So we're looking at yield, what's the yield impact, what is the financial impact, and then what are the externalities? What does it do to the environment? And when I talk about the environment, we're talking about the whole production system. So surface water quality is great. We as regenerative farmers are really interested in soil health. And the presumption there is if you have healthier soil, you're going to have better yields, right? Anyone want to argue that? No. So that's a presumption. We are addressing the economics and the yield impacts, but we're really interested in soil health. So we are giving in our first 4-year lease special consideration to the transition period, but we have a setup here the first year, and we farm the ground there conventionally. We'll talk about why in just a minute. Our score, the way we're going to evaluate this using these parameters, is a lease scorecard. We're going to look at the beginning of the lease and the end of the lease, what were our changes, how much money did we make, being positive here, how much money did we make, and compare the two systems side by side to make what we hope is a compelling argument for those that aren't using the practices. This is the systems trial. Systems research is a relatively new phenomenon. When I say relatively new, maybe 20, 30 years. So people are looking at a production system instead of looking at components, nitrogen rate, weed control options, blah, blah, blah. We're looking at a system. What the system does is allow flexible management. So we're using our best judgment based on the conditions that are presented to us, experienced regenerative farmers, to base our practices on. So that adds the wrinkle to the trial. So there's a lot of management involved that's based on our practice. Next. All right, 2021, the first year we got the land, we conducted what we call the uniformity year. We planted soybeans conventionally. We had a couple of objectives. First, we needed to identify and correct any site deficiencies that were on the ground. 20 years plus of lease history with conventional tillage. There were some deficiencies and we corrected them. I will talk about that, and we did that in a minute. Second thing, we had to do baseline sampling so we could establish a baseline of all sorts of soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. So at the end of our lease, we could see how the different production systems changed those parameters for the good or for the better or possibly no change. We also needed to know where we were going to put our trial on our field. So this is our trial field here. It's 50 acres. It's not all usable for this kind of work. There's a gravel ridge that runs transversely from southeast to northwest. Right in the middle, you can see where the tree punctuates it. So we had to pick one side or the other. We did a bunch of testing, different chemical, physical, and biological properties. We figured out what the deficiencies were and we corrected it. We know what our baseline is so we can compare. And just for a Friday fun fact, we had over 82 data variables that we had to make this analysis. So we analyzed it, we looked at the spatial variability and found the area of the field where we had the least amount of variability. So it all started with grid sampling for soil fertility in the spring. So we did a grid sample with for routine fertility in the spring of the year, and then we used that grid for doing our baseline sampling. Okay, next. And pictorially, here's some of the activities. So starting at the upper right, routine fertility sampling in the spring. The two pictures with the green vegetation, that's a mid-season soil health sampling that we did. Our gold standard soil test is the Cornell University Soil Health Assessment. The test is, the name is NRCS -216. This is the test that NRCS requires for all projects that look at soil health. It's a standardized test. It just happens to be run by nationwide by Cornell University. because they were the one that developed it, and frankly, they are ahead of all the other labs. We heard some about the Haney lab today, but as far as holistic look at soil health. This test and also health testing is done in practice mid-season. And so ideally, the target date is June 21st, so the summer solstice. Why do we do that? It's not a hippy-dippy thing. Let's celebrate the longest day of the year. The presumption is that the soil is warm and that we're going to have soil moisture. And so what the tests are going to capture is the maximum amount of biological activity. So that's why we do it in that period. In our case, it ended up being later in the season, slightly later in early July. To do the test, you have to have soil moisture, so we have to wait for rainfall. But in theory, so it's the third week in June. So we're taking the NRCS samples on the far left, and then penetrometer readings to get an idea of soil compaction, which is a companion to the NRCS test. That's the center one. At the end of the season, after harvest, we took profile samples to the depth. Let's be frank, the depth that we could go down with the bucket augers. We got two good depths, the top 2 feet of soil. The soil pretty thin, over gravel. Our profile samples, which look at what's carbon is in the soil profile to begin with. And the idea is that we can mimic the carbon programs that are out there, but also to measure change over time. So we did that, so we've got the soil samples, we got the carbon data, and it's all in the archive. All right, next picture. Here's a couple of examples of the sample output. So on the left side is the yield map when we harvested the uniformity crop of soybeans. And you can see there's a fair amount of variability based on crop yield, based on what the crop saw in the soil conditions. On the right is a lab report for one of our soil sampling stations with the Cornell NRCS 216 soil test. Why people use these and why they're really helpful is that they break soil health down into the 3 components of soil health. So soil physical properties, soil biological properties, and then soil chemical properties. In their system, they take the actual measure, so take a nutrient concentration, for example, parts per million, they put it into a scale that you can compare to something else that has totally different units. They combine the different tests together, they average them, and you come up with an average soil test score. So in our case here, for this one example report, the score is 53. That's medium. I put this particular soil test report up here because this pretty much represents, with numbers, with data, what we found at our site at Case Eagle Park. Medium soil health. Fertility, we don't have to worry about. We are, except for some variation in pH and soil test potassium, we're okay. Phosphorus, we don't have to worry about. In a minute, you're going to see an aerial shot of the trial site. We're stone's throw from the sewage treatment plant, so we assume that at some point biosolids have been applied there. So phosphorus was something that we didn't have to worry about. So nutrients, we're golden there. Where we're in trouble, soil, physical properties, the soil is really compacted. The people that did the penetrometer work to measure the compaction will tell you, yes, it is compacted, both in the top 6 inches, but also deeper in the profile. And biologically, it's dead. There's nothing there. When we ran respiration tests, we got very low results. We had very low abundance of bacteria, fungi, anything that's in the soil, and we don't have carbon to feed on. So we're starting from a pretty poor state. Next slide, please. So we took that data, we found the area of the field that had the least variation, drew it out of that. I gave it to land conservation with their CAP program, and knowing what we needed for a plot width, they came up with a plot diagram, which is shown on the right there. So it's a randomized replicated trial. We have 4 sets of strict plot comparisons. Next slide, please. So here's some pictures of us doing the work. So John and AJ laying the plots out from the CAD program. So they take the CAD program, they know the sites in the field, they lay out the corners of the plots, or in our case, actually, the center of the plot, the full tillage, the chisel plowing of soybean stubble, which is a pretty typical practice in Racine County, as well as the planting of the cover crop. So you see that we are planting into tilled ground. Remember I said that we were running this conventionally. We did tillage, a light tillage pass in the fall to incorporate corrected levels of potassium and lime, so it was incorporated in the soil, because you get one kick at the cat when you're moving into to a no-till. So we took care of that. Next slide, please. And just a here for you to see kind of the scale of the project. Next slide, please. So our trial scheme. So we have a bunch of field activities and data points where we take data that very much mimic the farming calendar. So we have bookmarks of planting and harvest. We do a little bit of work, takes a variety of soil measurements. Prior to planting, we do the planting, we have follow-up measurements, we have season-wide measurements where we collect different samples to look at soil biology, look at nutrient and nutrient levels, what have you. We characterize the cover crop biomass for the cover crop that's in the regenerative system, and then we get to harvest. So at harvest, we take the harvest information, yield information, and then we have some post-harvest sampling, and then we do the field work to set up for rotation again. We are in the corn soybean rotation. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce the rotation at all. Corn soybean rotation, the regenerative plot has a cover crop, it's a new white cover crop every year following harvest of the crop. Soil biology, in mid-season, middle of June, in theory, we take soil health assessment. With the funding that we've gotten from NRCS, we've also duplicated that by sampling prior to planting. NRCS's rationale for doing that, and this kind of gets at when do we take your soil health sampling. And I'll tell you, as a field of study and practice, soil health testing is relatively new, so we don't know a whole lot about it. What management factors influence, when should you take the testing? We are sticking with what Jamie Patton told us for the mid-June sampling. And we're also doing a pre-plant one. And the presumption, what they want to know is what's there and what potential could happen over the course of the growing season. Any question on what we're doing as far as sampling or our scheme? The other thing that we should mention is that we are continually monitoring the site with characteristics using a weather station where we're pulling all sorts of data, weather data, climate data, which may be important in explaining the results. Next. All right, our sampling scheme is very important because what we're trying to do is get at a fair comparison between the two of them. So we've got 24 sampling points. We need to go back to those sampling points every time to take our samples so that we can look at changes over time. So the way we've got these set up, there's 3 sampling points in each plot, and then they're paired between the plots. So the sampling points between the plots are very close together. So in theory, we're sampling like soil, so the only thing that's going to separate them is what we've done as far as practices. What's hugely important is the way we sample. So our sampling points have a 30-foot diameter, 15-foot radius. We only take our soil samples from the 10-foot radius that's right around the center of the point. We do the destructive sampling where we remove plant material. We're doing a lot of digging and that kind of thing. Not in the 10-foot radius, but in the outer 5 feet. And the presumption there is that if we do some kind of manipulation, it's going to change the soil biology, soil physical properties, and that's going to affect our readings. So we're really uptight about making sure we don't violate that and making our activities impact the data we collect. Does that make sense? All right, next. All right, year one, 2022. Here's an aerial view, number one from the introductory slide. You get an idea of the scale of the plots. The plots are 60 feet in length. They're in width to match the equipment that's available to us. They vary in length based on the field. Shape, we try to maximize the amount of acreage that's in the plot, so that's why we have the large size plot. They vary, but that's okay because everything's conducted on a per acre basis, everything's recorded on a per acre basis, so that really doesn't matter. Our minimum size plot is a little less than an acre, and that's pretty typical of our plot size for these large size system trials that people have been conducting for the last couple of decades. Next. All right, so here's some pictures of field activity. So planting in 2022 planting, southeast Wisconsin, in particular Racine, Kenosha, and into Water County, it was miserable. We had a really wet spring, which is unlike what people saw in northern Jefferson County or Dodge County. It was really wet. We had to sit out, wait for the rain to fall, for the soil to dry out. We ended up planting corn on the 3rd of June. So you see the tillage in the conventional, and then planting green, the cover crop right here, and a picture of the row showing our select closure in the planting green treatment. Planting actually, given the soil conditions, went really well. Next, please. All right, so here's some in-season photos. The installation of our weather station, which monitors not only atmospheric conditions above ground, but we also have several soil probes which measure soil moisture and soil temperature. And we've got those in a set of paired plots that are close to the station. The center picture shows us installing the communications hardware on a riser so that we can keep the communication in a straight sight line with the home station, not interfered with by crop growth. And also we had to do this to account for topography in the field. At the far south side of the field, you can see the weather station on the north side. The last picture is the soil health assessment, the sampling. We have to delay our sampling until early July. Again, you need the rainfall to activate the biology that you can pick up in the test. Next slide, please. All right, harvest pictures and actually a little bit of harvest activity. So here we are pulling the soil probes out in advance of harvest, but more importantly, tillage. We thought, well, maybe we could leave them in and just till around, but that doesn't really represent what soil conditions are. So we decided, on the advice from the soil health specialist, that we'll just pull the probe. So we did that. So then you see grain sampling. We sample the center rows in the plots to minimize border effects on the outside. And then the picture on the right from the cab of the grain cart. So this is a nuance, but this is really important. So we are trying to duplicate the kind of field traffic that we have at harvest time. And so the grain cart follows the combine, so we have the like amount of wheel traffic, just like you would have in a production field. Next slide. And then post-harvest characterization. So after harvest, we sampled the biomass, both above ground and below ground. So this is starting a plot for the biomass. You can't see it because you just started, but there's a sampling frame here. So we remove all the stover from the above ground sample area in the field. So that's my daughter. And you're thinking, her pop's kind of cruel. Well, you know what? I sampled the roots, so we came right behind that. We dug the roots, we washed them, and show you a picture. of that. When I was done making the roots, we took the cores, measuring the profile of nitrate down to 3 feet, and then we finished our fall activities. So then we planted the cover crop, or we did the fall tillage in the conventional plots. Next slide, please. So I mentioned how difficult the beginning of the season was. Our research results are definitely impacted by our conditions, both in 2021, when we were conducting the baseline sampling, and then in 2022, our first year in our transitional period. So, two different presentations of the data on the right-hand side, 2 time-stamped drought monitors for when we conducted the soil health sampling in 2021 and 2022. No question about it, we are in extreme drought in southeast Wisconsin. When we took our soil health sampling, 2022, really wet spring, the rains quit, we went through an 8-week period with very little rainfall. We got to the verge of being declared drought here in southeast Wisconsin. It started raining, kind of changed the growing season around. This definitely impacts our results. On the left are drought conditions, precipitation, and growing degree day accumulation expressed as departure from the long-term mean. This is very local data. It turns out that the sewer treatment plant in Rochester is a National Weather Service reporting station. They have the long-term data, so this is very local data. We're comparing these to 2021. You look at precipitation, we started dry, we stayed dry, accumulated 12-month deficit over the growing season. 2022, we started out wet, the rain shut off, we accumulated dryness, and then started raining again, but we ended the season still accumulating about a 5-inch moisture deficit. All right, so keep that in mind as we look at the results. Next slide, please. All right, these are our key soil health indicators. So back in our list of how we're measuring our performance, the 2 systems, we start with yield, then economics, then soil health. I'm presenting in reverse order because the soil measurements have an impact on other things. So these are the key impact indicators. Remember, I told you we've got 82 different measurements that we could show you. These ones distill the message from our soil health testing. I did mention this. We also, in addition to using the Corral test, we're also using 2 different tests offered to large laboratories. One is what was formerly known as the Haney test, which has come up several times in discussion today. So we're using their soil health assessment as well as their PLFA test to characterize the biological properties. So the data, the way it's presented, it's on the top, it's the indicator, the units, the scale, if it's an index score, the coefficient of variation. So this gives you an idea of variability. The lower the number, the better it is, the more tight the data is. The p-value, this tells you the significance. So the lower the number, the better, the more likely that a difference between the numbers is significant statistically. And then the actual data. So conventional and CSMS, climate smart management systems, it's the same as regenerative, but because NRCS is funding this, we got to use their lingo in the label. What do you see? A whole lot of nothing. Our soil health measurements, with a few exceptions, we really saw no difference between the treatments. We would have thought as soon as we started different management that they would have started to separate. We would have seen a segregation. But in our growing conditions, we did. There's a couple of interesting points in the data. Aggregate stability. So remember I said our soil has very little structure. We are seeing an improvement in aggregate stability with the regenerative system. And if you look at the statistics, that trend there says that's more than just random. There's an 80% chance that what we're seeing is real. The other thing to look at physical is the surface hardness. So this is compaction. It's a measure of compaction. here we are seeing a trend towards less compaction in the regenerative system compared to the conventional system. And that kind of makes sense. You think about it, you've got all those dry roots that are loosening the soil, maybe aggregating it. Does it show up elsewhere? The answer is no. Everything else, there's absolutely no difference. So I'm not presenting any of that data. All right. What about our agronomic performance? Next slide. Here are the key indicators, at least the ones that we have now. Our yield impact. The story is not good for regenerative. Regenerative treatment had reduction in yield, little 26 bushels to the acre compared to what we got in conventional. It's a 14.5% yield reduction in our first year of transition. How do we account for that? I don't have all the data listed here. I'm working on some of the data. What we would typically look at, stand, nutrient status, there's no difference. Stand, harvest stand, maybe there's a slight difference. I don't have the statistics on here. 1,500 plants more per acre, is that enough to cause that kind of yield decline? Doubtful. All the nutrient data that I looked at, looking at the soil nitrogen test, soil sulfur test, there's no difference. Something else. Our presumption, next slide. Okay. Here's the raw data presented as a box plot, which shows you the range in the data for each of the different treatments. This is really good data. It's really hard to get data with a coefficient of variance. Level of variation, 3.2%. It's hard to pick that in small plot research, let alone plots that are a little less than an acre to almost an acre and a half. So we've got really good data. That's the good news, I guess. All right, next slide. So our presumption is that it's layer compaction. So these are roots from the biomass sampling and showing regenerative next to the conventional. Disregard the scale. Actually, the scale is really important. I moved the roots when I was taking a picture to get better lighting, and I forgot to move the scale. So in your mind, move that scale up an inch, which represents roughly the soil surface. You can see layer compaction. The roots in the regenerative struck that layer of compaction, and that was it. When did that happen? During that dry spell. So the plants were probably moisture stressed and also were unable to take nutrients. When we get the tissue samples back, taking it from the ear leaf, that pollination, we will be able to confirm if it's a nutrient deficiency or not. But definitely it's water. So compare that to the conventional. And again, when we took the root system, the root samples, based on our measures of compaction with the penetrometer, the levels were the same. We couldn't pick up the compaction in the layer, but you definitely see it when we sample the roots. You can see those roots came right out. It's like they felt this. So we're trying to characterize the amount of carbon that's going back in. We are not making a presumption that we are getting every root bed of root carbon because we can't functionally get all of the roots that are out there just because root sampling is difficult, which is why no one's doing it, which is why we're doing it. Next slide. The other thing is that we had suboptimal grass weed control in our conventional plots, and we attribute that to spray interception by the cover crop. So I didn't talk about the management. We planted, turned around, terminated the rye, and applied the residual in the same paths. We had a lot of biomass that was out there. I didn't highlight the canopy percentage, but when we measured the canopy, the green living cover in the cover crop, it's on the order of 85%. So presumably that's going to be intercepting that herbicide that's trying to make it to, that we're trying to get to the soil surface. What if we had a different growing season and we had been able to terminate when we wanted to, at least get the residual on in early May when the cover crops looked like this? We probably wouldn't have had the grass weed pressure that we had, but we did have drastically pressured, and that leads us to spray interception. Dr. Rodrigo Wortley at Madison, the weed scientist, is working also in planting green and weed control, and he and his students have actually measured the amount of interception. So here's some spray card data from that. What they do is they put these spray cards out, they put it under the residue. This has got to be tedious work. They put it under the residue that's existing in the field, make the application where a droplet strikes the paper, it turns color. They use photo analysis that can determine that what's the area of spray coverage. In just no-till itself, soybean stubble, there's only 22% coverage. Heather cover crop, 12% coverage. So in their data, that's 2 tons of dry matter, and it's like the rise like knee tall. So it's pretty substantial. We saw, or he saw in his research, a 45% reduction. So that likely explains our weed competition. Other than that, our data doesn't show what we can attribute the yield reduction to. And I'm open to suggestions, both from the group and from the audience. Next slide, please. So with our automatic rainfall, or automatic weather station, we are able to measure all sorts of climate and soil measurements. We were able to detect runoffs. This is the good news from the regenerative standpoint. We had a pretty severe storm, the kind of storm that David was talking about, where it all happens in a very short period of time. We were able to document in our instrumentation a runoff event from that storm. And that's the good news for regenerative. We did not see the runoff that we did see in the conventional. Next slide, please. So this is definitely a work in progress. We have more data to work up. I was hoping to be able to present the whole package to you today. We've got more work to do. So by the 15th of March, we will put results in a one-page summary on our website. And so that's it for this year. We do have some changes that we need to make. We learned that the penetrometer system that we use, the straight mechanical penetrometer, doesn't cut it for us. We've had on our wish list the use of a recording penetrometer, which will measure resistance as it trails down and record it by depth. You get a profile of what the impaction looks like. If we had had one, if I could have borrowed one, we could have picked up on that layer compaction and it would have been different. And that might have changed our management. We might have chiseled the fall before last going in to take care of it. And maybe not, I don't know. That's the beauty of systems research, is you get to second guess yourself as well as the audience gets to second guess you, which I'm going to open that up to in just a minute. The other thing is we need additional soil probes, so I didn't highlight it on the picture, but we had some attrition. It turns out that when you got those probes, they're buried in the ground, you got a cable coming out. For whatever reason, they attract rodents. We lost 25% of our probes due to rodents cutting the cord. So I'm going to put tin foil around it to keep the rodents off. Why, when you're surrounded by corn grain, would you chew on a piece of rubber? I don't know, probably because it's expensive instrumentation. But anyway, that happens. So we need additional probes. And so monies that we get donated to our groups that we're not using for our outreach programming, this is where it's going to go. Next slide, please. I've talked too long. I'm ready for the grilling. Questions, comments? We'd really like to feedback. What's the question? Are those the rodents? You tell me.
Jim, on regenerative, you've got 1 year, there's one winter of dry cover. Is that what you're calling regenerative? This is, you're just beginning, of course, but that's what you got.
Right, so the question is, we've got 1 year of regenerative. are we representing regenerative in our system? Yes, but the onset. So we are in transition. So you practitioners out there, you regenerative farmers, did you go through a transition period?
Yes.
So we are here. Here's the other thing about the group. So we are wondering how you enter into regenerative. So within the Watershed Committee, we are at various stages of the word journey was used a lot, so let's call it our regenerative journey. People have done it differently. Most people start with no-till and do the cover crops. Me, I did it backwards. I started with the cover crop way back when, phased in no-till, and then took the leap into 100% no-till. And to do that, I've told a couple of people here this today, that I quit cover cropping for a year because I was worried about closing the slots in corn under the cover crop residue, so I didn't do it. Probably a mistake. So there's different ways to do it. We are in the first year, well, we're going into our second year now. So we're starting the journey. Does this reflect what we're going to get to? Hopefully not. To make the argument, the financial, the economic argument, to farmers that say, screw that, we're not doing it because we're going to lose their shirts. Hopefully this is going to straighten out. And over the course of 3 years, we add up all 3 years, we can look at the financial picture. Did it return more? Did it return less? Was that significant to you? The thing that we can't pick up on is what David talked about, the intangibles. Can we get out in the field 2 or 3 days earlier than the neighbors to plant? Because that cover crop would that moisture out. Can we bear traffic? Can we get out earlier and spray? All the stuff that add up. Can the field, the soil bear traffic better? You know, there's all sorts of intangibles. I personally at home, I'm scared to death of planting winter rye before corn and planting green. So I did it this past year. This is my first year doing it. I've been cover cropping for 30 plus years. I've been working in the field for 30 years. This is my first year. And the reason was, I look at our growing seasons. My last 5 growing seasons on the farm, the 2 wettest on record. I've been keeping records for 30 years. The 2 wettest on record, and that includes 96. You guys that have been around the block, you remember what 96 was, what bear was here in Racine in Kenosha County? It wasn't quite as bad in Waller, but still it was a problem. The driest year on record, last year, 2 inches less moisture than in rainfall than the 2012 drought, and then 2 other really dry years. I'm tired of having nature dictate to me planting. So I plant this cover crop, and the rye, and then I manage it using adaptive management. If it's dry, germinate early. Let it start sucking that moisture out. Rely on that residue to act as a mulch to prevent evaporation, release cut evaporation. If it's wet, like last year, let it dry out the profile, plant where my neighbors can't, and then terminate it. And that's exactly what I did. And that's part of the art that goes back to regenerative farming. That's part of the stuff that we can't pick up in our trial. Anyway, follow.
Well, you know, you talk about terminating early. What does terminating early mean? Does that mean 2 weeks before planting, or does that mean right at planting? You know, to me, right at planting is kind of terminating early. You know, if you're waiting 2 or 3 weeks after planting, that's not. There's a whole lot of variables that you can't do all in these plots. You just gotta go have the plots.
Right, and so the question is, and it gets to termination and termination timing. So what's early versus what's late? We can't do it in our plots because it's a systems research. We go with our gut feel. We use adaptive management. We probably would have terminated earlier this year if we had gotten out there. You saw what the picture looked like. June. The picture was taken June 2nd. We couldn't walk on the plots, let alone get out there and think about, May 2nd. We couldn't walk on the plots, let alone think about getting out there with equipment. So it's adaptive management. What's early, what's late. So the way I kind of look at it in my mind is traditional burn down. So that's pre-plant. That would be early termination. If you're terminating at or shortly after planting, that's early to mid. Late would be letting the cover crop compete for a while. But I don't know, it's all personalized. You know, it's what you think it is.
Jim, do we need to be doubling our spray volume in cover crops for herbicide application?
The question is, do we need to be doubling spray volume in cover crops
To overcome that.
to overcome the problem of spray interception? And given the conditions that are here, given that data, I would say probably yes. Here's the question. So for you, Chad, I think we're getting into the question. For those of you that plant green, I'm assuming you use residual herbicide and you're putting that on shortly after planting. Is that a fair assumption? Let the cover crop grow. So then that modifies my answer. So I think for later termination, later planting, when you've got that biomass and intuitively you look down and say, hey, this is going to interfere with that getting to the soil surface, then probably. Is that the answer? Though as far as I can see, I don't know. I think with timing planting, with the smaller cover crop, and here's another thing. So all of the major Midwestern University Extension Services are cautioning against planting green on this very issue. You saw the picture of what the rye canopy looked like in early May, when we typically would have had it planted or would be planting. And the kind of interception, I don't think the interception is there. I don't think it's a concern. I think it's when you're doing really delayed planting, frankly, you got bigger problems. Question?
I don't know the answer, but I just read an article on water-soluble versus oil-based herbicides. And I think it's the water-soluble will leach through the rye, so you won't get the escapes. You gotta find out which herbicide you use. But research that, water-soluble versus oil-based, and one will make it to the ground better.
Yeah, so the comment is there are differences in herbicide solubility in water, and so maybe we should be selecting products that are water soluble so that when it re-wets, it's going to make it to the bottom as rainfall falls through it. So this question's been on my mind a lot because we have another project in Jefferson County where we're looking at planting green and weed suppression, and so we're getting into this realm of where you may have interference with the residual. And so I asked Rodrigo and his research specialist, so what's the fate of this herbicide? What happens? Does it wash off? Does it sit there? Does it become oxidized by sunlight? The honest answer is nobody knows. I've talked to another weed scientist about it too. We don't know. And here's the thing. So the university was behind farmers collectively in cover crops. They are behind us in planting green. So maybe it's up to us to figure out. So a way around it, as Adam suggests, maybe increasing spray volume. I don't know. So the comment that kind of led to the question, would it pay for us to do, so we've got 50 acres out there at Caseyville Park. So we showed you the major field. This is where we decided to put the systems trial because of its size. We also have some other fields that are smaller that are tailor-made for small plot research. Would it make sense for us to put like a 3-year rotation with wheat that's in there? So some of you that aren't associated with the group probably are asking yourself that question, why didn't we do that? And what it boils down to is simplicity in getting the work done. So we're an all-volunteer organization, and doing work with our equipment at the park interferes with farming our own farms. So we made the decision collectively that we're going to stick with one crop. Initially, we were going to split it, corn on half, soybeans on half, rotate back and forth. Now we're doing this one crop, and that's because of this constraint of being an all-volunteer organization using competing equipment from our farm enterprises. In a perfect world, absolutely, we'd be doing that. Other questions, comments? So again, I'd like to bring up, well, thank you for your attention. So I had to go through some really dry science stuff there. And I noticed some individuals was off, and I apologize for that. But you gotta leave the groundwork. Why do scientists do what they do? So that's what I did. And now I can, going forward, just say, hey, this is what happens in 2023. So I'm gonna turn the mic back to Chad. I just want to draw your attention to the evaluation. Please fill it out and return it. As you see, we incorporated data from last year's evaluation into my presentation. And really, we're looking for feedback for what we did, but also future topics you want to discuss. Anything, any kind of information you want presented to you, any experts in the field you want to hear from, let us know. We're going to start planning for next year. Tomorrow Saturday, not Monday. So with that, thank you.